Hey everyone, welcome back to another video in French. It's lesson 7 and it's indirect object pronouns or les pronoms compléments d'objet indirect. Task today is we're going to learn to use indirect object pronouns to replace nouns when writing and speaking. And our goal by the end of this video is to be able to correctly use these object pronouns when speaking or writing. Partie 1A, l'introduction. So, on utilise les compléments d'objet indirect quand il y a une préposition ou numéro entre le verbe et l'objet. So, we use indirect object pronouns in French when there is a preposition or a number between the verb and the object. And some of those prepositions can be like de, du, de la, or something like à la, au, and something like dans, sur, devant, and then numbers, obviously. So we're going to be using lui to replace à plus a person or an animal, and this is for singular. And we use leur to replace à and some people or animals, so this is plural. We use or the y to replace a thing that's preceded by a preposition and an inanimate object or an object that is not living. And we use en to replace a thing preceded by a form of de. So, for example, du, de la, de l'apostrophe, or de apostrophe, or a number and an object. So if we take a look at this example before we continue, this is also labeled so that you can see the parts of a sentence. So Madison veut parler Robert. So here you would have Madison, the subject, veut is the first verb, parler is the second verb, and then Robert would be the complement. And so if we want to change that, and again, I haven't taught you yet how to identify which one you're using and where you would put it, but just for the sake of this quick example, you would change it to Madison veut lui parler. So you're going to put the lui, you're going to choose lui because it's a person, and there's an a before it. And because this is a singular person, you're going to be using lui. You're going to put lui before the infinitive or the second verb that is in its infinitive form. But we're going to get to that in a second. So, partie 1, lui ou leur. So, on trouve avec le mot interrogatif. So you can ask yourself the word or the question word who to, to see if what you're looking for is lui ou leur. So, in the first situation, if there's only one verb, you're going to put the pronoun before the verb or in front of the verb. So, for example, je parle à Steve would become je lui parle, and you're basically asking yourself, so who? And it's Steve. So Steve is what you're changing. And there is an a before it. So here we look to our rules and we see, okay, so that could be lui ou leur. And then there's a person. It's only one person. It's Steve. So you're going to be using lui. So you're going to put lui before the verb. So je lui parle. Situation 2 is when there are two verbs and one will be conjugated, the other one will be in its infinitive form. You're going to put the pronoun or in front of the infinitive. So that was basically kind of like what we saw in the first example with Madison. So here we have nous allons parler au prof. It's going to change to nous allons leur parler because when you're asking yourself the question word who, it's the teachers. So you're going to be using lui ou leur. And also they're plural. So you're going to be using leur, and you're going to put leur before the infinitive. So it's going to be nous allons leur parler. Situation 3. So when there's a tense, verb tense, like mostly when it's in past tense, you're going to put the pronoun in front of the auxiliary. So for example, Marie a parlé à Angela will become Marie, or you can just change it to elle, doesn't matter, but Marie or elle lui a parlé. So the auxiliary would be a, and you're putting lui because Angela is one person, it's singular, so elle lui a parlé. And say if you have something like j'ai parlé au garçon, when you're asking yourself the question word who, you're saying the boys. So the boys is plural, you're going to be putting leur before the auxiliary a. So je leur ai parlé. And just for when you want to go a step further and talk about negatives, I have some it's basically the exact same thing. It's just that what matters here is where you're going to put the ne pas. So for example, say you have tu ne veux pas lire à la classe, you don't want to read to the class, where over here the preposition would be à la, and when we're asking ourselves the question who, it's the class. The class here would be obviously plural. So it would change to tu ne veux pas leur lire. So the ne pas is going to stay around the veux. Again, in this case, you also have a second verb, which is in its infinitive form. So that rule where when there are two verbs and one is its infinitive, you're going to put the pronoun before the infinitive. That still applies to this. So we're going to put tu ne veux pas leur lire. Another example could be je parle à Melanie. So you're going to talk, so I talk to Melanie. There's only one verb here, and that's parle, and here is our question verb who is answering Melanie. So it'd be je ne lui parle pas. So you're going to put lui before parle, because that's the only verb. And then the ne pas is going to go around both of them. Tu as parlé aux filles, so you talk to the girls, and that would change to, or aux filles would change to leur because it's plural. And you're going to put tu ne leur as pas parlé. And in this case, obviously, because it is passé composé, you're going to put the leur before the auxiliary, which is a. So it's going to become leur a, and then the ne pas will go around both of those. And ils ne vont pas donner le cadeau à Mike would become ils ne vont pas lui donner le cadeau. So the question, who would answer Mike? And Mike is one person, so we're going to be using lui, and we're going to put lui before the infinitive verb, which is donner. So it's going to be ils ne vont pas lui donner le cadeau. And here are some practice questions for you. I'll put the answers to these in the description box. Partie de pronom objet I. So on trouve avec le mot interrogatif quoi. So we're asking the question what in this case. And remember that this pronoun or object pronoun goes for something that is not living. And same thing, just like we said in the introduction part, it's preceding a preposition and an inanimate object. And a preposition, we talked about these could be prepositions. And then I just want to let you know that chez is also a preposition. So some examples here is going to be vas-tu à la bibliothèque? So are you going to the library? And you would answer something like oui, j'y vais. And in this case, I went one step ahead by actually answering the question. So regardless, it doesn't matter, but you're going to be using the object pronoun I, and it goes before the first verb, which is the only verb in this case is vais or va, if we talk about the question. But because you don't want to say je y vais, right? You want to elide the two vowels, the E and the Y. Replace the E and je with an apostrophe, and it's going to be oui, j'y vais. So yes, I'm going there, as opposed to yes, I'm going to the library. Est-ce qu'il travaille chez Henry? And then, for example, if you want to answer with oui, you would say oui, il y travaille. So yes, he works at Henry's. And again, there's only one verb in this case, which is travail. So you're going to put the E before that verb. And here are some practice questions as well. And the first one, or a couple of them, I've done for you. So do they eat at the cafeteria? And you would say oui, elles y mangent. So yes, they eat there. The only verb here is mange or manger. So you're going to put E before that. And here are some other questions, and you can do this by yourself. The answers will be in the description box. And just for example, number 4, the question is asking with vous, and you're going to be answering this. So when you're answering it, you're using the word nous. Partie 3, pronom objet en. So some examples here could be, and again, just because we already talked about en up here in part 1a, I'm not going to be like rephrasing it or re-saying it. So just keeping those rules in mind. Some examples here would be, est-ce qu'il achète des pommes? So again, I want to answer this question. So I would say, oui, il en achète. So yes, he bought some. So here you could see that sometimes a kind of a similar translation to E would be there. So like, yes, I'm going there, or yes, he works there, or something like that. And then for us, a similar translation in English would be some. So like, yes, he bought some, or something like that. So, est-ce que tu as trop de travail? Oui, j'en ai trop. And then again, because here the only verb is avoir or a, you're going to put the before that, and you're going to ally the je by putting an apostrophe instead of the e in je. Est-ce que Jean a plusieurs devoirs? And oui, il en a plusieurs. Tu as deux pommes? Oui, j'en ai deux. And just a rule of thumb is whenever you are talking about numbers in this case, you don't want to get rid of the number. So for example, if it's asking tu as deux pommes, well, the only verb here is a, and the preposition or the number, there's no preposition, but there's a number, and that number is two. So we're going to be like, oui, j'en ai, which that's because we're using a, and we're putting that before the only verb, which is avoir or a, and we're aligning the two vowels, so j'en ai, and then you're going to put the number still. You're going to say deux. You don't want to get rid of that. And here are some practice questions. The answers to these will also be in the description box. And if you want to go one step ahead and talk about montrer, nous, veux, then we can talk about that too. But if you feel like this is already too much for you, you can stop and you can come back and learn montrer, nous, veux in indirect object pronouns in a later date. But for now, ils peuvent être direct ou indirect. So if the verb does not take a preposition, the pronoun is direct. So you have to make agreement. But if the verb does take a preposition, then the pronoun is indirect and you don't need to make an agreement. And we don't use the word se in front of it. Like I know some people say, you know how we say me, te, se, nous, vous. We don't use se for this case. And this is just a chart, so it can help you better understand in which order these go in, and then also where the ne pas would be. So some examples here, which I've already done for you, and then after you'll have the opportunity to practice. But for now, say you have nous, l'aurions, parlons. So I haven't given you this full sentence as in what it's talking about. I just gave like the final version. But the point here is to recognize the order that we're putting these object pronouns in. So obviously first you would have your subject pronoun, which is nous. And then here looking at our list, first would go leur. And then you would have I, en, and then parlons. And all of these go before parlons because in this case I assume the only verb is parlons or parler. So it's going to go before that. Nous ne l'aurions parlons pas. So this is the same thing but in negative form. So the ne pas would always go around the object pronouns and the verbs they're attached to. In this case, the only verb is still parler or parlons. And so the ne pas is going to go around that. And then you still have the leur, en in order. Vous n'allez pas y en parler. This is also in negative form. But in this case, the ne pas is only surrounding or going around the first verb because it's like you are not going to talk. It's not saying you are going not to talk. Like I know it sounds weird even in English, but basically that's what it would be if the ne pas was not around aller and if it was around parler. So that's why it has to go around the first conjugated verb. And then the I and the en are in order according to our chart, and they're going before the infinitive, which is parler. Elle ne lui en a pas parlé. So elle ne lui en a pas parlé in this case is also negative. You have your subject pronoun, and then the ne pas surrounds your object pronouns and your auxiliary. And why auxiliary? Because in this case it's a passé composé, right? Parler. And it would be like elle a parlé. So here you have ne, and then in order would be lui and then en. And then your auxiliary, because that's lui, or in general, any object pronoun goes before the auxiliary in a past tense sentence. And then you have your pas and then parler. Tu la lui y as donné. And in this case, you have another passé composé sentence. And it is not negative in this case, but it's tu la lui y. And then the a is basically the auxiliary here. So they're all going to go before the auxiliary in order, and then donner. And in this case, donner is also, there's an agreement made. And pratiquez. So here are some practice questions for you. And if you want to do a little bit of a challenge, you could try number 6, where there are multiple object pronouns for you to identify and properly put in the second sentence. So I've already given you hints on how many there are. And there's something after donne, so you have to identify what that's going to be. But I'll put the answers to all of these in the description box. So this is our lesson for today. Hopefully it was straightforward. Our direct object pronouns lesson, lesson 6, was the last lesson, so be sure to check that out if this is kind of confusing. Usually we obviously do direct object pronouns and then move on to a little bit more of a challenge, which is indirect object pronouns, but in general, they're basically the same thing. The same situations applies, like the exact same thing, except with different object pronouns. But yeah, so thank you for watching this video. Hopefully it all made sense, and see you in the next one.